huge sound business that we have. And now it looks like we had an auction for the land and nobody showed up. We got one out there. It doesn't look like buy the land. The problem with that is you start wondering if people have kind of made some false assumptions that are just not working today or will ever work. And I can point to one project that's very similar to this. It's the one on the riverfront in Everett. They buried $80 million into that property. Sold it 5 years ago to a developer who didn't do anything, who didn't flip the land for $18 million. And hopefully Everett's going to finally get started. They're 20 years into that project. And when we only get one bidder in auction who doesn't even want to buy the land, it starts, my gut starts telling me, better be real careful here. Joint venture never been proposed by the port. A lot of risk in a joint venture. And at least in the city of Everett's case, they probably would have been better off walking away from the first offer and selling land earlier this year for $18 million instead of the $8 million that they did sell it for. One of the interesting issues in Everett is they use the same consultant the port's using. And in looking at that consultant, they consult for a lot of landowners, and you wonder about, it's like having a broker with a lot of houses for sale. You wonder at what point, if somebody wanted to relocate to the Pacific Northwest and they're representing Everett and Bellingham, which client gets them. And considering we've had no offers on the land that I know of for cash money or even a lease on this first initial 10 acres, it makes a person stop and think a little bit about going forward into a joint venture. I think that should be a very methodical process, and you got to be real careful because even some major developers have had problems, even though they've accomplished things in the past. Harcourt's had some issues, as a lot of developers have, but like the developer in Everett, they thought they were a great developer too, had a hell of a portfolio, and they couldn't perform, even though it all looked good on paper. You know, we just had an auction for a piece of land and nobody showed up really from the region with any money, from within the state, United States, and Canada, and we get one outfit from Ireland who doesn't want to buy the land, and it looks a little desperate. So, a couple of things. If you decide to go through with a joint venture, I highly recommend that you get a second opinion from somebody who has a lot of success behind them outside of Harcourt, simply because Harcourt represents competing customers for the Port of Bellingham.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn.
My name is John Munson. I'm a retired longshoreman. I live on the Lummi Reservation, and I have questions about, I'd like the commissioner to address questions on when the permit for dredging of the shipping channel is going to occur. When I moved back up here in 1989, I started going to meetings where they were talking about the dredging of the shipping channel, and nothing has transpired as far as getting that channel dredged to this date. The behind the pile talk that you hear about the status of the dredging is that the port has not reached any kind of accord with the tribe as far as getting them to sign off on the permitting process so that the dredging can proceed. How long are we going to wait? I mean, somebody with a skeptical frame of mind might think that you people really aren't interested in getting the channel dredged. It's kind of ironic to me because the maritime trade in this port carried water for the operation of the whole port for generations before the time that the port purchased that Georgia Pacific property, and ever since that time work went dead. I had to work in Seattle for the last 5 years of my career because there wasn't any work in the Port of Bellingham. I think that, I mean, we've got to deal with this issue. I mean, it looks to me like it's being ignored by design. Another thing I'm concerned about is the proposal by the people that it looks like you're considering for the development of the property. When you look at the build out of the property, there's not only a marina in the aerated settling basin, which has been increased, doubled in size. There's a new marina right at the right at where the shipping terminal is. There isn't one bit of use of the shipping terminal. There's high-rise buildings built all around where the shipping terminal is right now, and you're not going to get any kind of decent economic return out of this pie in the sky proposal. I mean, I don't know how long we're going to keep on trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Pertain. I've almost pronounced it wrong.
It's, my husband's name, yeah. Anyway, the reason I'm here today is to tell the commissioners that I really want to see the Port Commission meetings video recorded and posted on the website. As you probably already know from correspondence that I have sent in before. I think, in late January, I went to the Port's website looking for information on the earlier January meetings, and the only information I found was minutes from the December 17th meeting, and this was, I don't know, around January 27th or so. And and I was surprised because I hadn't been there looking for information before. Because the Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham have recordings of their council meetings, I really think it's high time that the Port had that information and made it available to the citizens. We have a lot of important issues coming up: airport expansion, waterfront development. A lot of people can't make it here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They work, and I took off of work so I could be here today. So I encourage that. I think there's a lot more people that want that too. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Pat. And Robert, is it Clark?
Yes. Hello, my name is Robert Clark, and I'm the manager of video services up at Western, but the comments that I have are just my own as a citizen of Bellingham. I want to second what Pat just said about the need for videotaping and archiving port meetings. One of the challenges that I've seen in the Bellingham area is that there are three main governing bodies of the economic and if you will, the political growth of Bellingham. And one is the county, one is the city, and the third is the port. And between the three of them, the port by far has the furthest to go in providing an ongoing archive of not only its decisions, but the give and take that goes on to make the decisions in the first place. And I think seeing people in action, I think hearing what they're having to say, and then looking at that over time is not only a valuable insight into the decision-making process, but it gives people a sense of participation and buy-in and gives you more strength in making your decisions in the future. So I strongly support it. And also, as someone who has helped local government agencies like yourself to help develop this sort of thing, I'm also a resource in the area to provide you with the means to do so. So please keep in mind the fact that myself and others like me exist and that we're all willing to help make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bob Burr.
My name is Bob Burr. I'm an old age pensioner from Bellingham, and that's why I can be at the meeting today. And that's one of the first things I want to ask you to reconsider is evening meetings. I think the newest commissioner made a very good case as to why the afternoon meetings would continue. I thank him for that thorough reply, but I think that you should consider at least some evening meetings particularly when the evening meeting is a subject in which the public has the greatest interest. Some issues that you discuss, the business community, the developers have the largest interest, but there are other issues, including the waterfront, where I think the public interest is paramount, and I think that meetings where that is discussed, you should have during the evening. Second, I would like to third the motion that you videotape your meetings. This commission needs more openness, it needs more transparency, it needs more visibility. Most of the people in Whatcom County don't even know what the Port of Bellingham does. Those of us who do know what the Port of Bellingham does in the public, many of us have developed a distrust for the port, rightfully or wrongfully. And I therefore suggest that you need visibility in order to regain the trust of the people. Next, I'm also disappointed in your selection of Harcourt. I would prefer that it be a Washington firm. I would prefer that it be an American firm. I also am a little bit upset by what I read about the Sullivan Square fiasco. So I would ask you as a commission to comment upon the vetting that you have done of Harcourt on Sullivan Square. Also, in looking at the plan, it's a creative plan that ignores a lot of the environmental details. I would ask you in your negotiations with them to get down to those environmental details quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. And Renata Kowalczyk?
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Renata Kowalczyk, and I reside at 1015 Railroad, Bellingham. I am here to ask the Commission to approve the expenditure for video recording of these public meetings. I won't dive into the dollars. Emery Fayola has done a very thoughtful job commenting at the latest Bellingham Herald article and showing the impact of 12,000 expenditure on a 23.7 million operating budget of the port. What I just want to add to this is if this would be a MasterCard commercial, after listing all of the expenses, it would end and improving port's PR and taking a leap forward towards rebuilding trust in the community, priceless. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. And Joy Cullen. Joy?
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you to the port staff for the work that you've done to bring forward and move forward a plan to actually make changes on the waterfront. The people of Bellingham have been waiting a long time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Joy Gilfillan. I'm with Uniting Creatives, and we made the 4 Pillars proposal to the port. And we are very encouraged to know from the tone of this presentation that you give that you actually really do want to participate with the people of Bellingham, with the other participants, to build a future that we can all be proud of. We do all want a world-class city to live in and to operate in. For those of you who don't know, we do have an opportunity to bring the Sea Orbiter to Whatcom County. We have a letter from them to try to locate a world-class global facility here in Whatcom County that would do scientific research. So we're very eager to engage in partnership conversations with Toll House, with the Harcourt Development, with the Port Commissioners, and the other stakeholders of Whatcom County. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for listening.
Okay, Joy, before you go, just some folks are here, can you direct people to that, so you over the information to their website?
It's not public yet because we were waiting for the right to actually publish that website. Seaorbiter.com, certainly you could go right there.
Okay.
And there are some really remarkable, and if anybody wants to come and talk with us, I can show you the Sea Orbiter, the Marine Research Center. They're partnered with people like Rolex, Microsoft, major corporations in the world, NASA, NOAA.
Thanks, Joy. And Mr. George Dyson?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the chance to say something here. And I would just go right into it. I, of course, support the recording of these meetings, which could be done for nothing if need be. If you'd have volunteers who would do it and get it out on YouTube the same night if you so wanted. Doug Carlberg is always eloquent and correct. And I won't say when, but if you enter into these exclusive negotiations with Harcourt, who I hope you do your due diligence, I hope you also, you'll then have 120 days, maybe give a last final consideration to a plan B in case things with Harcourt don't work out. And what I would urge you to do as plan B is consider actually making the Bellingham waterfront available to the many job-creating, water-dependent businesses in the state of Washington, which is, I think, what Charlie Sheldon wanted to do, and actually bring our waterfront back to life. And the crown jewel of that is the Whatcom Waterway, which was built to be the same width and depth as the Panama Canal, so we could get large-scale shipping in here. When we bought that property for $1, all those years ago now, it had a 150-ton perfectly functioning crane on a heavy-duty pad that we sold for scrap. I think myself and a lot of other water-dependent businesses would love to see that. You find out where that crane is and bring it back. We could support a lot of business with that. We have a 16-inch fresh water line. We have a cogeneration plant. We have this dinosaur hanging around our neck, which is a extinct rail spur. It'd be interesting feasibility study, look at what would it do if we actually put a train station in Bellingham? What would that do to our local economy? We could have passenger ferries. We put $38 million into the airport. What if we put that into actual local transportation in Bellingham? So in 100 years, do we want to look back and be remembered as the generation who abandoned Whatcom Waterway, which is why Bellingham is here, and foreclosed on all options to the benefit of the tax shelter in Dublin, or do we want to be remembered as the people who brought the Port of Bellingham back to life? Thank you.
Well timed, George. That's all that's signed up. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment?
My name is Wendy Harris. I'd like to address habitat issues because they still haven't been addressed. I'm very concerned that we're moving forward with this development process and we have no habitat analysis, no updated EIS that addresses plant and animal impacts. When the waterfront planning process was going forward, the lack of habitat analysis and habitat connectivity was a big sticking point with the public and with the city council. And we were promised by the city council that subsequent to the waterfront plan being enacted, they were going to work on a habitat analysis and a connectivity plan. Of course, that's not the right sequence in which to do it, but that being better than nothing, I took the city, your partner, at its word. And so I'd like to know whether the port is going to honor that obligation to do a habitat analysis, because that analysis has to be done before you go in and start planning development. And let me tell you why you want to do that, even if you don't care about that kind of stuff. Since the last time the EIS was done, there have been 3 species of flatfish that have been added to the endangered species list, one of which is listed as endangered. You really don't want to start getting into developing an expensive project, then to find out you have very serious ESA problems because you've neglected to do an analysis or protect endangered species. It's what the people want. It's what we've been promised. I'm asking you to honor that. When I took a look at the Harcourt plan, that the part of it that was released to the public, there is no mention in there about wildlife. In fact, they talk about unrestricted public access through Whatcom Creek to the water. We're talking sensitive estuarine area without any understanding that some of that area is sensitive habitat that might need to be restricted and kept off limits for protection of species. I'm also concerned that Harcourt, because they're not local, they don't know Puget Sound, they don't know us, they don't know our species, they don't know our love for the wildlife. And I'm really concerned. When they originally provided those plans, it really reflected a lack of awareness with our local codes, and that includes our environmental codes. Please address this gap. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lindy. There will be some further, so if you folks just want to line up, then I don't have to keep asking that. Fine.
Hello, Mark Buer. I'm the owner of 2020 Engineering here in Bellingham. Just really pleased that the port staff recommended selection of Park Court. I also wanted to let everybody know that the visionary behind that is John Reed. He lives here in Bellingham. He's got an architect firm in Ireland, but he's moved here with his wife. He's got 2 kids that go to Seaholm High School. And he, just like the rest of us, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of us in this room, moved here to Bellingham because we like Bellingham and we want to see Bellingham be as great as it can be. And I'm looking forward to seeing the next days and that this is a turning point to see this long, many years effort to get to this point, and looking forward to moving it ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity. My name is Lori Province. I live at 2501 West Street, Bellingham. And I would like to ask you all to consider, as you do your deliberation and give your approval to the port director, which appears that that's going to be your action item today, that you do it with conditions, and those conditions should include the changes made in those documents, the interlocal agreement documents and the design documents, etc. Wendy mentioned the habitat. There's also a living wage standard and things of that nature that were put into the city's approved documents at the end that were not part of the consideration and were not part of the draft documents at the time the RFP was issued. I would also like to encourage you to consider putting in conditions, if you will, or at least asking very strongly and determining very strongly that there be some regular payments to the city. If this is going to be sell-off land, then I, as a taxpayer, want a return on my investment. This share and this lease, that's not what was envisioned. It's certainly not my preference. My personal preference is always to own the property. That's my C corp, and I'm the taxpayer. However, since the decision's already been made about what to do with the property, then I expect that we ought to, as taxpayers, be able to hold you as commissioners and the director accountable to do the best you can for all of us and not sell us off short. Thank you so much, and I encourage you, as I say, to look at some conditions because of the changes in the documents that were not in those draft documents when the RFP was left. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Hi, Lane Southcott, United Creatives, 4 Pillars Development Group. I think that one of the, in a nod to Doug and George and John as far as jobs, and Joy brought up the Sea Orbiter as a potential if the port is able to step up and we are able to make that work, whether we're working with Harcourt or not. That is worth somewhere between 1,200 and 1,800 high-end jobs for Whatcom County, both in the sciences, in research and development, in longshoreman activities, in assembly down the road of the Sea Orbiter components. It's worth literally that many jobs. The 4 pillars, and thank you, Rob, for the encouragement on pursuing the economic drivers of the 4 pillars in the Sea Orbiter. The 4 pillars is worth easily, with its 2 different educational pillars and its innovative incubation hives for businesses and its uniting media, is worth at least another 2,000 jobs for Whatcom County. So we look forward to working with you and hope that you have a very nice week.
Thank you, Lori.
Good afternoon, Mike Kaufman, 1620 Huntley Road. Some of my activism in this county has been in the last 20 years or more with electrical transmission and gas pipelines and electrical generating facilities. And the only thing that I know about the proposal at the moment was what I read in the newspaper. And what went through my mind was we already have a big footprint of a generation plant down at the waterfront. Why would we want another building tied to electrical generation when we already have it? And it would seem to me that that building, the granary building, was a co-op building. And when we do electrical generation, it's not very many jobs that associate with that, in my opinion. That more things could be done from a co-op perspective, respecting the history of that building. It's just what went through my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any further comment?
Hi, Hugh Beatty, 2104 Mackenzie, Happy Valley, Bellingham. I would just like you to, whatever you do, why don't you put a coat of paint on the building, the granary building, make it look nice at least. Fix the damn windows, you know. Why let it sit like that for years and years? It's a nice place. You can paint some maps on it or something. Let the tourists see where it is, you know. There's directional signs on it.
Thank you. And Councilman Brown?
Good afternoon. I'm here speaking as an individual council member and not on behalf of the county council. Rod Brown, Whatcom County Council. We just had a discussion recently about the use of live streaming of our council meetings and to provide those meetings on the internet afterwards, and that's a discussion that's going to be ongoing. But I'd just like to formally invite the Port of Bellingham, if you have an interest in doing the same. I'm sure we could probably accommodate both organisations at a lower cost by using the same technology and the same infrastructure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anything further? Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is one of our work study items, so today we're not asking for any particular direction. What we want to do is follow this routine of letting you know what's going on the waterfront and get any input that you might have. What we're going to do today is just click through a few slides to let you know what's going on now that we have the plan approved. So this is all our effort, our years-long effort to try to reconnect Bellingham to the bay. Mr. Hogan, do you leave on me? Do you have it all the way set up, Mike? Okay. Thank you very much. So, yeah, the headline here is that we now do have a plan approved. This was, like I say, years in the making. And I think both the port and city staff and I think the city council and port commission are pleased with how this turned out. We took a lot of complicated topics, you heard some of them today, and built it into a plan that is, I think, very well balanced. It's a practical plan and it's one that we can afford. So what we've done is we've taken this 237 acres and we've tried to build a plan that really delivers as well as we can on the whole very robust community vision for the waterfront. So doing environmental cleanup, doing habitat restoration, building jobs into our waterfront, reconnecting it to the bay for new parks and public access, and doing it in a way that really represents not only a connection with the past, but a step into the future. So at this point, we have a master plan that has been approved. We have agreements with the City of Bellingham on zoning and regulations. One of the most important ones we have is an interlocal agreement for facilities projects. And this is an interlocal agreement between the port and city that really is aimed at continued site preparation. There's been a lot that's happened over the last 10 years. There's been a lot in the form of environmental cleanup and getting cleanups ready to go. We've taken down a lot of the old unused buildings. There used to be 50 buildings on the site as part of the pulp and tissue mill. So we're continuing with that site preparation, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. But basically, what we're trying to do now between the port and city team is start to really bring the concepts for parks, infrastructure, and environmental cleanup further down the line. On the waterfront, we have actually 6 model toxic control cleanup sites. I've got the 5 port sites listed here. One is the I&J waterway, and I'll be talking about that a little bit further in the next work study session. The central waterfront site, the pulp and tissue site, the chlor-alkali site, and then the Cornwall landfill. The 6th site is the R.G. Haley site, which is basically in between the Cornwall landfill and the shipping terminal. So at this point, we have all those sites being worked on under agreed order with the Department of Ecology. We think that we're going to have a number of these turn into cleanup decisions this year. So we're really poised to make that important milestone step. For the Whatcom Waterway site, we already have a decision and consent decree in place that we are implementing at this time. So going around the horn, what I'm going to do is talk about each sub-area and just what's going on in each sub-area. So the marine trade sub-area is one that includes about 50 acres of upland and I think about 37 acres with the aerated stabilization basin, the treatment lagoon. This one includes the C Street terminal project, which is along C Street here, including the cleanup of that shoreline and rebuilding and repaving the uplands to support our marine trades tenants in that area. That's one of the kind of high priority pieces of work. I'll also be talking a little bit about the I&J waterway here and continued operation of Bornstein Seafood. So in the marine trades area, we're going to be coordinating with the I&J cleanup, the Whatcom waterway cleanup in this channel, and then the central waterfront cleanup, which includes that 50 acres of upland.
Hey, Mike, there's some odd shading around some of the water areas. You know, back on that. It's kind of yellow. It makes it look shallow. I want to make sure people don't get the wrong impression.
Yeah, I don't know what that shading is. We have a federal channel here. There's pretty deep water in the center of the channel, but these channels do shallow up at the shoreline. On the ASV, all the way around here, that's a pretty steep riprap slope. It does shallow up to about 0 feet mean low water towards the toe of the waterway in different areas. This area over here is an eelgrass bed that tends to shallow up in low tide circumstances as well. But yeah, I'm not sure what that shading is as well. Thanks. Okay, so that's the marine trades area. The downtown waterfront area is the area where we are planning on bringing this urban village concept to life on the waterfront. I should mention, between the marine trades area and the downtown waterfront area, there's a very big shift between long-term future use expectations. So in the marine trades area, we're planning on keeping really activities going there that you see today, boatyard haul-outs and marine trades type of activities. In this area, we're converting an industrial waterfront to one that is more mixed use and urban village. If you take the whole 237 acres, we're keeping about 60% of it, or 160 acres, in that traditional marine trade. So this area has turned out to be a fairly unusual part of the waterfront redevelopment. This one includes a lot of work by the city. The city has put together a project management team that is led by an engineer at the city, and they've hired consultants, so they're leaning forward into this site preparation as well. Their project team, including their consultant team, is going to be looking at the specific concept and design for Granary and Blodell Avenue. This is one of our most important early access places into the waterfront. Part of their team also will be looking at Waccamawadaway Park. This is a part of the plan where we're trying to get new access down to the waterfront, and this will include provisions for visitor moorage and kayak launching and that sort of thing, for example. One interesting part of the downtown waterfront is work that we're doing in a sort of sustainability area, and this is work where we're trying to go beyond the typical infrastructure for public and private utilities and look at the possibility of a district-wide utility that could blend a number of different possible energy sources into one district-wide utility. That could include micro hydropower. It could include waste energy off the existing cogen plant. It could include solar and other things. So the city has taken a hard look at that as part of their infrastructure work. And what they are doing is coordinating with our work then on the cleanup parts, which include the Waccamawadaway cleanup. And the Waccamawadaway is a site where we do have a consent decree. We've completed a joint aquatic resource permit application to all the agencies. We've gotten approval from all the agencies except the Corps of Engineers, and we're continuing to work with them to get that permit approval. We're hopeful that may come this year. We are working with them through some questions that the Lummi Nation has asked. The other cleanups that we're working on coordinating with are the pulp and tissue cleanup in this part of the waterway. And importantly, and we'll hear more about the exclusive negotiation agreement later in the agenda today, both the port and the city team are moving forward with the understanding that we have to coordinate with the master developer. And so in this 120 days of exclusive negotiations, we're going to be working with that developer to make sure that the street grid works, that the cleanups are understood and that sort of thing. And if they have recommendations for any kind of adjustments, we'll be able to understand the ramifications of any of those potential changes. But that coordination with this first proposed master developer is an important part of the work that both the port and city team have in front of us. So continuing to move around the shoreline then, the Log Pond area and Bellingham Shipping Terminal is a big area that I've brought together for this presentation just because they really, I think, go well together. The focus is on marine trades, and we are continuing to market that area for marine trades. As we do that, we're coordinating with cleanups both in the adjacent Waccamawadaway and in the upland, the chlor-alkali cleanup. The chlor-alkali cleanup is moving along well. That's where we have one of our very active interim actions in play right now for mercury cleanup around the old Georgia Pacific mercury cell building. And you'll hear more about that as we move through the year as well. So this is another area that's really focused on marine trades. And then going all the way around the horn to the southern part of the site, this is what we call the Cornwall Beach area. It's an area that the city team is very actively engaged on as well. They have a team along with consultants in place, and the team includes our port staff as well, to start doing kind of master planning for that park. And so they're looking at the opportunities, how to reconnect Bellingham to that part of the bay. What kind of flavor of park do you want? Do you want it more like Marine Park, or Marine Park or Blodell Park, or do you want more of a habitat flavor to it? So those are the kind of concepts that are coming out in alternative designs for the park that will be in front of the public later on this year as well.
Hey, Mike, how would the public get involved in that?
I would say to pay attention to the city's website. The city is moving forward right now. They are planning a series of public meetings. They actually have they're meeting with the Park Advisory Board, and they also have a small group of stakeholders that they're working with. But as they move forward with, they will have, I think, a series of public meetings that should be well advertised and listed on their website. So this is an area, like I mentioned, that has 2 sites, and they are the Cornwall Avenue landfill and the R.G. Haley cleanup site. The Cornwall, these sites are right next to each other, and some of the contamination overlaps, so the cleanup has to be very well coordinated among those 2 sites as well. We're one step ahead of the city. The port is taking the lead on the RIFS for the Cornwall site, and that is getting ready to go out to public comment here later on this spring. The R.G. Haley site is probably 6 months behind, so we'll have 2 opportunities for public cleanup or for public comment on the cleanup later on this year for those, and then hopefully have decisions on those 2 sites later on this year as well. So that's the brief update on the waterfront, and I just wanted to leave you with the understanding that we're really making progress. Both the port and city team are really leaning in now to delivering on the plan that was approved late last year. Any questions before we move on to the next topic?
Mr. Stoner, do you plan to have those meetings at night where there's public dialogue?
Yes, typically when we have either public meetings for the cleanups, those are led by ecology in coordination with us, and those tend to be in the evening. And we do those locally here so that they're easily accessible. And then I think the city park team is also planning on having those public meetings in the evening as well. That's kind of typical of these kind of projects. Thank you.
How about the division between Cornwall Park and the R.G. Haley? Where would that occur on that? Can you run your arrow?
Yeah, the division is right about here.
Almost
so
half
on
and half.
This side is the R.G. Haley, and on this side is the Cornwall Avenue site.
Hey, Mike, you're going to talk about the IMJ waterway here in a minute. Could, in that, as part of this, because I put it together myself, can you sort of put that in the context of the greater Bay-wide, because there was an action plan for Bellingham. Can you sort of put all of that in the context of that action plan? Because I think a few people have raised that issue here today, and I think an overall picture of how much work is going on and what that work is might be useful.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, this goes back a ways. Back in the early 90s, there were 2 federal agencies, EPA and the Corps, and 2 state agencies, the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Ecology, that wanted to find a way to do bay-wide cleanups in a way that was both efficient and effective and engaged with the local community and avoid protracted, legal battles that sometimes tend to come out of these cleanups. So there was a competitive advertisement to see who would be the pilot program for that effort, and Bellingham won that process. So since 1996, we have been, the port has been the co-manager along with the Department of Ecology for a multi-agency program that's called the Bellingham Bay Demonstration Pilot. And that has a dozen different federal, state, local agencies and both of our local tribes working together to try to identify where contamination problems are in the bay and get those cleaned up. They've also been working together to try to understand the Bellingham Bay ecosystem, the inputs from the Nooksack River and the 4 urban creeks that we have around this area, and to start building habitat that was well connected and understood throughout the bay. So we've had a series of projects that have been funded by the state looking at bay-wide circulation, sediment drift throughout the area, forage fish utilization of the entire bay, and we use that information to build our best understanding for habitat restoration along all these shorelines. That information then, the cleanup and habitat information, gets used in land use decisions as well. So for example, for Cornwall and the R.G. Haley site here, the land use is a park, but there will be a lot of information built into that project that will make sure that the cleanup is safe and effective, and that the habitat restoration along the shorelines supports the Bellingham Bay ecosystem. So thanks for asking that question. There are millions of dollars that have been spent over the last 15 years on Bellingham Bay, a large majority of it coming from the State Department of Ecology. Does that answer your question?
Look at the habitat that's in the new drawings for the parks and all of the areas, the shorelines and the old pilings, and it really exceeds far the amount of habitat that exists now on the Inner Harbor. Isn't that true?
It certainly is. We have we have a waterfront that's been hard used, for 100 years, and that hard use included creosote vertical bulkheads and creosote timbers and old riprap. Some of it hasn't been maintained well recently, so we have a lot of those structures now degrading and falling into the waterway. So the shading of the structures, the creosote timbers, and the poor type of riprap being used is all a detriment to habitat. The plan for the first phase of the Whatcom Waterway project is to remove all that old dilapidated infrastructure and replace it with modern, more fish-friendly materials that do support habitat, not only for Bellingham Bay, but for the Whatcom Creek estuary. So with that then, go on to the next work study session. And what we wanted to do this time around for the commission was do a little bit of focus on one of the 12 Bellingham Bay sites, the I&J Waterway. So briefly, this is one of 3 federal channels in the waterfront. The other ones are Squalicum Waterway and the Whatcom Waterway. This is the I&J federal channel, and I'll show a little bit more about that later. It's one of our waterways that is that's really very actively used. It's used in a couple of different locations. One location is up here. This is the entrance to Squalicum Harbor. So we get a lot of boat traffic, small boat traffic in here. And then down in this area, we have a small boat haul out, Hawley's Hilton Harbor Marina. That again is used for small boat in and out and then upland work. We have Bornstein Seafoods, which has been a really important tenant to the Port of Bellingham for over 50 years. They do seafood processing and packaging here. There are a lot of commercial fishing vessels that come in and offload here. They load ice and that sort of thing. So it's a very active part of the waterfront. Another facility that is, I think, relatively new is the U.S. Coast Guard facility. And this is a facility that, gosh, I think it's been here for about 10 years now in this location. And whereas nobody else can build in a federal channel, the Coast Guard apparently can. So they built their facility right in the federal channel here. And what that does is, for the inner part of the federal channel, it really creates a pinch point right through here. Bornstein uses their docks here to raft out commercial fishing vessels from time to time. The Coast Guard uses this side of their facility to moor smaller vessels, and they have to have a really quick egress to get out, to do their emergency work out in Bellingham Bay and the Northern Sound area. So this access corridor, while it's pinched, is one that is maintained open for the Coast Guard. But what it means is this inner part of the waterway really doesn't lend itself to much in terms of additional water-dependent use. And that's an important feature when we are looking at the cleanup, because what ecology tells us is, tell us what your land use plan is, and we will make sure that the cleanup is safe and protective for that type of land use. So in this area, we have commercial and industrial haul-outs in this part of the waterway. We have a Coast Guard station in this part of the waterway. But because of this pinch in the federal channel, one of the things that we did in the waterfront district plan was to look at this part of the head of the waterway as a great opportunity for a public park with public park access to the shallow head of the waterway. And then this area, which is now vacant, has a vertical pile bulkhead, but we probably aren't looking at a water-dependent launch system here because of this limited corridor. But we do want to preserve that upland for marine trades that may be associated with dry stack storage, for example, or those kinds of activities. So that's a look at the existing land use right now, and a few of the features that I wanted to make sure were on your radar screen. And then this is a schematic that basically shows the waterway and the limits of the federal navigation channel. So all federal channels have a length, width, and depth. In this one, the depth is authorized at minus 18 feet, which is just what Bornstein needs in this area. But it's a lot more than the Coast Guard needs in this area. And we don't need any depth at all for this public access beach that we're talking about up in this area here. So as we move forward, we'll be looking at this federal channel as a land use feature, and what kind of land uses really we expect into the future. In this area, we don't expect to be talking about any deauthorization of a portion of the waterway because it's probably not necessary at this point, but we will be looking at what kind of uses we expect to see here. But main thing is I wanted to show you just how shallow it is up here. I think the zero contour line is right here. So that goes right up to the foot of that existing bulkhead, and then it's quite shallow beyond that. So it may be that this curve here really lends it towards some of our habitat restoration goals and public access, but not so much for water-dependent access.
Quick question, Mike. How permanent is a federal navigation channel? Like, once it's drawn and assumed under federal status, is it basically there until you don't want it to be there?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's there until it's there's any move put forward to change it. So they're authorized by Congress for particular navigation and commerce. If that navigation and commerce continues to be important, then it is maintained. In all of our 3 federal channels, though, they're not fully maintained, even under the best of circumstances. In today's regulatory framework, typically there are areas at the head of these waterways. In the old days, they were placed at the mouths of creeks. This one wasn't, but Squalicum and Whatcom Waterway were. So these days in Squalicum Waterway, there is no dredging allowed by our permitting agencies in the head of the federal channel because of other environmental regulatory requirements. But that doesn't mean you have to deauthorize the waterway. You can just leave it in place but not utilized. And that's typical across the country. I think there's 11,000 miles of federal channel, only about half of which is maintained, especially in this really, this funding climate back in DC.
So a theoretical question. If this, the upwind, which is very slowly soaking in, remains in the federal navigation status, but we just ignore it and never ask for it to be dredged, is it still possible 80 years from now to say, you know what, we have no use for this?
Yeah.
Can we get 18 feet?
Absolutely, yeah. I think nothing on our waterfront is permanent in terms of forever. It's all as far forward as we can forecast. But in this circumstances, for example, one scenario may be that the Coast Guard station moves, and then another scenario may be that we land a big marine trades tenant in this area that needs the full 18 depth. And we would want to go to the expense of rebuilding the bulkhead and dredging the berthing area and talking to the Corps about dredging the federal channel. That's all possible in the future. What you would need to do is go in and work with the Department of Ecology to amend the cleanup strategy there. And it would be expensive. Everything I just mentioned would be expensive. So amending the cleanup would just be one part of what would be a fairly expensive change here. But if you got funding to do a particular project, it's all doable. Okay? So then with that kind of look at land use and the geometry of the channel, we now, in this phase of the project, we have a remedial investigation that is done. We know where all the contamination is. We're moving forward with starting to package feasibility study alternatives and try to identify what we think is the preferred alternative. We'll be doing that with other users in the area, including the Coast Guard and Bornstein. And we'll be taking a long-range look from the port's perspective, because we do expect to be here for a long time, and try to come up with what we think is the best, most practical, cost-effective alternative. So this is just an idea that is not a preferred alternative at this point, but it's one that comes to mind. So in this area, we usually break out these sites into different subunits. So what we have here is a subunit in the navigational channel that we would dredge down to clean bottom sediment at its full 18-foot authorized depth. To make that most usable for Bornstein, we would want to dredge the berthing area as well so that they can fully utilize it. Once you do that, you're on a really steep slope under the pier. And so what you need to do is to prevent that contaminated material from sloughing into your clean bottom is to dredge it as well and get that cleaned up. And so this is basically a full removal scenario in this area, and it may require some work on the docks and bulkheads there to make sure that they are stable with that full removal scenario. And then around the Coast Guard station, it's plenty deep for them right now. It ranges from maybe 12 to 15 feet in their access corridor. And it is the information we have says that clean sediment is continuing to silt in and gradually bury the contamination that's at the head of the waterway. So that these areas up here, including this dark area here, lend themselves basically to to controlling the sources so it's not recontaminated, and then letting Mother Nature do its work and allow that to clean up naturally without having to disturb it. In the head of the waterway, this is one, as I mentioned, that we're trying to design for future public access through a park. So in the head of the waterway, we want people to be confident to be able to go down into the intertidal area at low tide and play. We call it the beach play scenario, where kids and people can go down and dig in the mud flats and that sort of thing and do that safely. So in that area, we would probably be looking at installing an environmental cap there that was thick enough and robust enough to stay there through any wind and wave and prop wash events, and also lend itself towards that kind of beach play scenario. So this, I think, is I think a scenario or a preferred alternative like this is the direction we're heading. What we'll be doing is working with ecology to develop a range of different possibilities. They like us to look at both a no action alternative and a full removal for the whole waterway alternative, and then some options in between. This is one of the ones that would be in between, but really I think work well for our existing land uses there.
One quick question, Mike, at the head of the waterway in the green, the intention there would be a place for people to touch the water, so it's not a habitat area as much as it is a park if people are intended to be using the beach, much like Marine Park?
Yeah, good question. That's one of those ones where, sometimes we have public access where we just expect people to come down and hammer things. And other places we have shorelines that we devote really to almost exclusively to habitat. Some places like Marine Park down in Fairhaven is one where we kind of set up for both and. So in that area we have intertidal mudflat and eelgrass beds that are really only exposed at very low tides. But we have a shoreline that is foot friendly, we like to call it. So that's an area where we do encourage people to go down and look under rocks and that sort of thing. But it also has very important habitat function and benefit. And I expect that's probably what we're looking at here is one where we set it up for good public access, but it'll also have a lot of habitat benefit.
Mike, you look at, in the green area, would they be allowed to launch kayaks and so on there? Is that going to be a problem going out through the Coast Guard waters there and also Bornstein's?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do try to kind of separate kayak activity from those kinds of industrial or Coast Guard, emergency response activities. There hasn't been a decision made at this point. As the city goes through their planning for that park exercise, that'll be one of the things that they'll really take up, I think. So it may be that we do something where we discourage kayaks in that area, but I think the Coast Guard and Bornstein are both operations that that really like to work with the public as well. So there may be a way to get kayak access there as well. All right. Thank you, commissioners. There will be more on this later on this spring.
Thank you, Mike. Sylvia, quick update on our parking.
Closed. I lost my mouse.
Jeez.
Mark, can you give her a minute?
After Sylvia gives us,
I just need to find mine.
after Sylvia gives us presentation, Rob's going to give us a quick heads up on the question that was raised about videotaping. Sure.
So the questions come up on videotaping the meetings. We've heard a number of comments on that. The commission at the last meeting, which was on the 4th, I believe, of February, directed the staff to put together an RFP, a request for proposals on videotaping the meetings. The staff has done that. We will have the RFP out. It will be published on our website by the end of this week. So be looking for that. Again, we're looking for requests for proposals to videotape the commission meetings on the first and third Tuesday of each month. And we'll do an evaluation of those proposals, and we'll pick a proponent, and we'll come to the commission for approval.
Any quick comment on that one? All right, thanks, Rob. Sylvia.
Hi, thank you, commissioners. We have an update on the bellwether on the bay parking, and this was a joint study or analysis done by real estate planning and marinas to look at parking for bellwether and then this building here and the boat launch.
Sylvia?
Yeah.
Mike Robbins here would like to come.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me get this. I have the same problem as Mike. It's not progressing.
One more. Arrow. Use the arrows.
Use the arrows. I'm getting it deep.
Mr. Hogan's coming to us.
Sorry.
It wasn't just me, Rob. Some good stuff.
It's everybody over the age of 50 here that's challenged. Okay, so this is
He's
the...
only 49.
Oh, okay, this is the study area. Again, we looked at all the way from the parking lot over here, including the boat launch, and then Bellwether itself. We looked at both the needs for Bellwether, for this office, boat launch, and then the 3 marina gates that are here, 9 and 10 down this direction, and gate 12 on around by Bellwether. Wrong direction. So Bellwether Phase 1 includes the hotel, the office buildings that are there, 2 office buildings, and then gate 12. And in that area, we have a rather large parking garage that's shown gray, below grade. A lot of people don't park there, and if everybody did, we'd have more surface parking. We have 269 spaces there. Some of them are reserved for the hotel or leased by the hotel, and the rest of all of that area in the garage is shared use. We do have 71 surface spaces and then some on-street spaces. And then right here adjacent to gate 12,
So before you go on, how do you differentiate between the shared use and the on-street use?
the shared use in the garage
In the
are
garage.
marked, and the reserved spaces are marked in the garage for the hotel, and everything on the surface is shared. And then the on-street are all shared also. So, and then there's some loading area that's marked a loading only for gate 12. So if you look at all of those spaces together, we are short of parking spaces if you look at the existing city code. But because we have offices that are there during the day, 8 to 5, occupying different time frame than the hotel and the marina gates, which are more evening and weekend. If you look at the overlap of those, there is adequate space most of the time, other than for very high impact events at the Bellwether and 4th of July and busy boating season weekends. Sometimes it fills up. And we do have, during those times, some off-site overflow parking area options available that I'll show you in a bit.
So in those 67 spaces that the hotel leases, are those are gated off just for the hotel? You
They
need
are.
a key to get in, is that correct?
Yes. Can you get in?
It is gated by the hotel, so it needs a hotel guest.
Thank you.
Hey, one more question before we lose track of that thought. How is it possible to not be in compliance with city parking requirements when they won't let you build without providing us with parking?
Well, we are in compliance with city parking requirements. On Bellwether, the original part of Bellwether, there was not a code at that time for the marina, gate 12. There wasn't a parking requirement. Now there's a parking requirement of 1 space for every 2 slips. And at that point, we had a lot of surface parking available. And then also over time, we did a planned contract for all of Bellwether where we had a parking plan. And as we've moved forward, we've modified that parking plan. So we have enough space to meet code. If we look at shared parking requirements, we wouldn't have enough spaces if each space were individually permitted. If we had a hotel and those were all exclusive and the offices were all exclusive.
So do you have any idea why there's a requirement for parking for each or every 2 slips?
Why? Well, normally if somebody doesn't provide parking, those cars park on the street or in parking that other people might want. So cities do tend to put parking requirements in. And in downtown, cities don't always require parking, but most places they like to put a minimum parking requirement in, assuming that people will come and they will bring cars and they need to have enough parking. But in this case, when the marina was built, there was not a parking requirement. At that time, there was a requirement for boat launches. Now that in the new shoreline code, there's no parking requirement for boat launches. So codes change, and it's the reason we did this study and the reason we continually to monitor it is because we want to have enough parking for our customers, and we don't want people complaining, and we don't want people not going to a restaurant because they can't find a place to park. So it's in our interest as a port, to make sure that we always have enough parking and that it's convenient for people. That's what we're looking at. Okay, now I'm not going, Mr. Hogan, can I impose upon you again? I'm not advancing to the next slide. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. Why am I not advancing? Oh, now you've got to use the mouse. I don't know if I'm where.
I got it right here.
Okay, so Bellwether Gate Phase 2, we recently constructed buildings A, B, and C over here, and that did have a formal joint shared parking agreement approved by the city. Because there we were quite a bit short of what the code required if each building was individually permitted. But again, because we have Anthony's in that area, we have Giuseppe's, which is a restaurant, we have the CH2 and Hill offices, which are mostly daytime. We were allowed to have joint shared parking with some assumptions that the building A, B, C, and D future uses would all be sharing the same parking, and that was approved by the city. So we have a good-sized garage, and those are not public spaces, those are shared by the Bellwether Gate customers. And then we have surface spaces that are Bellwether Gate, and we have on-street parking available for anybody. But again, we have a joint shared use agreement, and if those uses change or any of those buildings are sold, we'll need to go back to the city and justify how is the parking then going to be managed. Squatter boat launch, as I mentioned, currently the shoreline code requires, in 1989, the shoreline code required 30 spaces for every boat ramp. We have 4 boat ramps, we should have 120 spaces. The new shoreline code doesn't have such a requirement. But we still, again, need to have boat, trailer, and vehicle spaces. So we have...
One quick question.
Yeah.
So the city requires parking space for every 2 slips. The shoreline management, which comes out of, what, the state?
That is city.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a federal program, boils down to the state, boils down to the city, and it's the city code that requires.
So the boat ramps don't require any parking?
The boat ramp didn't require parking when it was built, or doesn't require parking now, but did when it was built.
But
so
now we have to provide parking for boats that never move and provide no parking for boats that come and go.
Well, our strategy here, though, is to try to do the joint shared parking where you can provide parking when it's needed and don't have a lot of surface land sitting there tied up in parking and creating stormwater when it's not needed. So I think we've actually got to, with all of the joint shared parking we have and offsite overflow lots, we've got it pretty well covered. But you're right, there are a lot of times of the year when this lot sits empty, and there's a few peak weekends when you can't possibly provide enough parking. So for right now, an issue that we're going to be having soon is the Redden Marine proposal has been submitted. In March, you'll be seeing a proposal to redevelopment that Redden Marine site, and there's a boat launch overflow parking lot there that right now provides about 52 spaces for boats and trailers. When that site is redeveloped, we'll need to develop an alternate site for the overflow boat launch parking. And again, we have 91 spaces on site. We need about 120 total. And during the peak of boating season, quite often our 52 lot overflow spaces are all full. So we have 140 some spaces that are used. plus on-street. And again, 4th of July weekend and busy boating weekends, you can't provide enough parking. So we're looking at possibility of putting some additional interim parking lots over next to the I&J Park or next to Hilton to cover that short-term overflow parking for the boat launch once the Red Marine site is redeveloped. And this is the last area we looked at. The Harbor Center building, where we are now, has a very large parking lot just north of us. That is 322 vehicle spaces needed, available, but we only need, according to the code, 236. So we have a lot of extra space up here in this area. And one of the long-term recommendations we'll be looking at is, can we take some of the center landscaping and striping out to make that available for boat launch overflow parking? It would make sense because we have a lot of space available up there. And that's something that we'll be studying. We don't need to do that this year. We need to study it over the next few years to see if it makes sense. It might also make sense to put another building up there. So we'll be taking a look at that and coming back to you in a bit. But we do have an excess of space there, both for gate 9, 10, and this building. And that rarely fills up other than a busy boating weekend, 4th of July. So we have some immediate actions that we're going to need to take this summer. We're planning on designating 8 spaces in the Bellwether garage and reserving those for gate 12 customers. There is a shortage of boating spaces right adjacent to gate 12, and we do get comments from gate 12 customers that they don't want to have to compete with everybody for parking. We would like to improve directional signage and information, both for boaters and for other customers. We find that a lot of people don't use the parking garage as often as they should, and we need to direct more people down into that garage.
So that's really needed, direction signs.
Yeah, we're working on that. We put together a little flyer that we talked with the MAC last week about to distribute to gate 12 customers, but we'll look at better signage altogether. We do need to look at an interim overflow lot to replace this one here next to Red Marine, and we need to do that before Red Marine begins construction on that site. So that's an immediate issue that we'll need to take a look at this spring, hopefully have it open either before construction starts or before boating season. And then we continue to manage the parking for high-impact events. And we do that now. If there's an event at Bellwether that has more than 100 or so people attending the event, we have security folks. They keep an eye on how much parking is available surface and in the garage, and they close Bellwether Way and direct people to the boat launch overflow or other parking lots when the other lots are full. And we'll continue to do that.
How often does that happen, Sonia?
A couple times a year, not very many.
Okay.
And then we will need to update the Bellwether Gate joint shared parking agreement we talked about before Bellwether D redevelops, and that's scheduled by May of next year, or before anything else happens where those uses are changed. And then we've talked about evaluating on-street parking here on Long Roader, and we might be able to squeeze a few more slips or parking spaces along Bellwether Drive by restriping it.
A quick question on that, Sylvia. So if that's city right away, we can't count those.
We can't count those, but we can use those. We can count Bellwether Way because it's a port road, and we can probably get a few extra spaces there. Roader on-street, currently we have a bit of an issue with people with campers parking there and staying there forever, and it becomes a campground. If those campers weren't there, then boaters with trailers could be there, and we think boaters and trailers are more important than campers. But no, we can look at that as far as if we striped it for boat trailers only, or if we got rid of overnight camping and striped it as no overnight camping, or if we enforce some of the other rules, we might be able to get a little more on-street parking available for people that are using these facilities. And then future actions, this is the last slide. We do need to get interim parking available during Building D construction. Building D is the vacant gravel lot down on Bellwether. And when that building is built, we're going to have a shortage of parking during construction. will need to construct when Bellwether D is built. That joint shared parking agreement requires that there be 30 to 40 excess parking spaces available for use of buildings A, B, and C, and we need to make sure that happens. They will continue to monitor parking supply and demand, look at how often does the overflow boat trailer lot fill up, how often do we have these high impact events at Bellwether where we need off-site parking, and just start counting cars a little more often to see how serious is the issue. Right now it seems to be working, but we want to monitor that because we don't want to build more parking than needed. And then again, evaluate public-private partnership projects for the future. At some point, years from now, there's going to be need for a parking garage possibly. It may be that as Bellwether expands, if the Red Marine site expands, there may be opportunities for some type of a joint use parking facility on around to the waterfront that could be available for overflow parking. So we'll continue to work on that into the future.
When does Building D construction, when's it scheduled to start?
The lease requirement is by May of 2015, and we don't have a firm date on when it will start, but it's required to start or is required to be extended by May of 2015. Thank you.
I've only got one quick question. You didn't, well, I guess you did sort of show it, the gate 9, the parking in front of gate 9. Let's say, I think the city requires 0 parking, and you take the risk of having no parking on your building, it's up to you. Sorry. I'm in a small minority of people. All of them seem to be developers, by the way. But if you were in gate 9, and you may not be able to answer this, but I'm asking you now, and that's a parking garage, and it's got 3 times as many spaces, so you've got 900 spaces there. Can you count those for the harbor? So we can, I'm not a huge fan of these big flat lots because you lose all of the volume in the space. And, this is an urban environment and volume counts or something. So how close, is there any sort of rule on how close those have to actually be to a slip?
Well, the city code requires, say if we wanted gate 12 customers to park there and we wanted to count how many spaces were available, it needs to be within 500 feet of the use because that's how far the average person will walk. But
I mean, on the sidewalk, because it's not that far across the harbor.
Yeah, the way our harbor is if you have a boat at gate 9, you probably would want a dock cart close to your car to get your gear onto your boat at gate 9. Mm-hmm. And most people with a boat down at gate 12 wouldn't want to push their gear all the way around to a parking space that's half a mile away, quarter mile away.
Well, they certainly wouldn't want to, but there's a competing issue that we have to balance, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, counting it for on the numbers and then counting it on how many people come to your meetings and complain, you might have 2 different answers.
But it's 500 feet.
Yeah, 500 feet is the city code. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So I guess we can move to our executive action items. I'm going to move item number 2 up first.
With each of the master developer proponents, which there was 4 of, one of those interviews was done by phone and one was done in person. We did a lot of follow-up conversations with each, with questions, etc. We selected one, which we're going to talk about a little bit later here. About a month ago, we started narrowing that field down and came up with what we consider to be our finalist. The process included the city. The mayor, Kelly Linville, sat in on those interviews. Tara Sundin from the city sat in on those interviews. Jack Laus attended some of them, and Steve Swan from the university attended them. Key considerations here, the timeline could change, so we didn't guarantee anyone a specific timetable or that we would have any kind of conclusion. Their proposals could change. Keep in mind, as was stated earlier in public testimony, the RFP came out before the master plan was approved, so we made sure everyone was aware that we had this master plan pending approval. We asked them all to keep their eyes on the city website so that they could see what those changes were and just basically be flexible. I think the word we kept using over and over again is we're going to be nimble here and make sure we can respond to any needed changes. The evaluation considered technical and financial feasibility. I want to throw a caveat out there that We have not done a full due diligence. We need to do that still. We need to get into the balance sheet. We need to get into more of the financial aspects of the company we've selected. Companies are reluctant to do that with government entities such as ourselves because then we have to disclose that to the public, and it might be private information they don't want made public, especially if they're the ones not selected. Once they've been selected, they're a little more willing to divulge that information. We consider the capacity and experience of the developer and the ability to advance the plan. We did select Harcourt. Before we get into, I'm going to have some pictures up here while I'm talking of what Harcourt has done in the past. This was not an auction. I heard mentioned earlier that we were auctioning the land and we had no takers. That's absolutely not the case. This was not an auction. Nor did we ask for anyone to bid or to give us proposals to buy the land. We asked for proposals of what to do with the land. Again, we're very much in the evaluation stages of this. We're trying to figure out who the best partner is to move this thing forward with the port. Some pictures up here of what Harcourt has done. That's who we're recommending to you that we enter into an exclusive negotiating period. I want to emphasize that this isn't them being selected as the master developer. We are selecting them to negotiate with to be the master developer. So whether they end up being the master developer or not still remains to be seen and will be a result of those negotiations. We have a lot to learn about them. They have a lot to learn about us. They have a lot to learn about our community. And we're going to make sure we cover each of those bases before we select a master developer. The committee, again, made up of the city, the port, the county, and the university, and staff, have a unanimous recommendation that Harcourt is the company we should be doing that due diligence with. We'd like to spend the next 120 days figuring out if they have the experience, if they have the vision, if they have the capacity, and if they fit within our community. We're also recommending to Harcourt that they partner with local groups. So United Creatives has a great connection and idea with this ski orbiter. We'd love to see that worked into the plan, so we're going to encourage Harcourt to sit down with United Creatives. I think they've actually talked already. And to try and work something out there, see if we can involve all the great ideas that everyone has into this plan. Washington Housing Authority is another one where we're going to encourage them to form a relationship with. And then, of course, the granary building. We received 3 proposals for the granary building during the same RFP process. Those 3 proposals, one was a Canadian company and 2 were local. We think that Toll House Service brought the best proposal forward. They had a good mix of tenant selection, they've got good financial standing, and they have the experience to do the job. We're not recommending that we enter into an agreement with Toll House. What we are recommending is that Harcourt sits down with Toll House and comes to an agreement on the granary building. The exclusive negotiation process has 2 sides to it, the port and Harcourt. We will review their financial capacity. As I said earlier, we've got a pretty good idea of their net worth and who they are, but we'd like to dig into those details a little further. And no, Tamara, you don't get to go to Ireland to do that. Consider redevelopment, the revised development proposal, as you heard here earlier. Their initial proposal went basically from Roeder all the way down to past the shipping terminal. We've had discussions with them since then. They reviewed the master plan approval since then, and they backed away from that bigger plan, and now they're confined to the 10.8 acres. We need to see what those revisions, what the final revisions look like. And we need to negotiate terms of the deal. That would include whether the land is leased, whether it's sold, what our partnership looks like going forward, what our involvement looks like going forward. For Harcourt, they've got to come up with some ideas of what the risks and what the opportunities are. Their business and their for-profit business, and they have to figure out if they can make money on this. They have to create a revised proposal. So while they created this original drawing from going from Roeder to the shipping terminal, they'll need to revise that. And they'll need to negotiate the terms of the deal on their side. In front of you is the recommendations for waterfront district developer selection. Did the motion get read? So with that, I would ask for your approval of this document, which is an exclusive negotiating period with Harcourt, LLC, and at the end of 120 days, we'll either come to you for approval of selection of a master developer, or B, another case, a B scenario or fallback plan, or C, we'll come to you for an extension because we simply didn't get everything done that we needed to in 120 days.
Ross, could you, just for the sake of the audience and us maybe too, tell us who was on the committee again?
So I was on the committee. From the port also was Carolyn Casey, Mike Stoner, Sylvia Goodwin. And then from the city was Tara Sundin, Mayor Kelly Linville. From the county was County Executive Jack Louse. And from the university was Steve Swan. Did I miss anybody? Oh, that's pretty much it. We had some other staff that came in and out depending on what we were talking about at the time.
No. Is that it, Rob?
That's
Rob
it.
is taking notes on.
That's okay. I was worried about the PowerPoint, so I wasn't listening either.
Any quick discussion, Jeremy?
I think it's interesting, it's important to note that this is an initial development opportunity, we aren't making the final selection at this time. I received a lot of emails that said, we're going too fast in selecting someone, and we aren't selecting anyone at this point. The next 120 days are going to be very important for both the port and Harcourt, doing deep due diligence on both parts.
I just would agree certainly with Dan on that it's not a done deal in the sense that we'll be signing tomorrow or after we vote or whatever. It's going to be a while, 120 days. And I think that gives us an ample opportunity to examine what's going to be presented, and if that's what we're looking for in the city of Bellingham.
So I have a few thoughts. Rob has heard me say this before. To be true to the people that elected us, it's very critical that I and Jim and Dan have a voice in this negotiation. Are you envisioning right now where the commission steps in this next 120 days, or are we not part of that picture until the final?
As I say with all real estate transactions, I think it's a mistake for the commissioners to negotiate directly with the tenants. I think that's staff work, and we come to you for approval. That being said, this is a little bit different of an animal, and we intend to involve not just the commission but the public. I suspect the commission will get a lot of time with Harcourt, and I suspect the public will get a chance to meet Harcourt as well.
Okay, because to me, in order to reflect the value of the people that put us here, I have to have a voice in this. Otherwise, we're just rubber stamping what the staff have come up with. And not that it's not a trust issue with what you guys are doing, it's just making sure that the voice is carried forward.
Well, absolutely. And I draw a distinct difference between having a voice in the process and negotiating with the tenant.
I agree.
Okay. Yes, a voice in the process, absolutely. We'll keep you informed every step of the way. We'll come to you every time there's any kind of significant milestone accomplished or questions coming up, and we'll ask for direction.
All right. Some people are aware, and know that you are, and so are Jim, and I'm very interested in a project that focuses on jobs first. And I've been advocating for some sort of a campus hybrid development that's jobs, and then if everything else fits in that's in the plan, I'm not going to fight that. I just want to make sure that sort of thing is included. So if Dan has a comment like that, or Jim has a comment like that, that those are included. And Harcourt's very aware of what the commission is interested in, not just a vague master plan that they can sort of work whatever they want to do with it. And so, having said that, I do want people to know that I'm not interested in micromanaging this at all. As a builder myself, I know that when people muck about, it can be very, very difficult. So my clients come and visit me on my job site, and I don't work that day because I'm just walking around deciding where a light switch is going to go. And that's part of the process. But I do want to, have you guys figure out the actual willingness of Harcourt to work within the master plan, because so far we've seen a pretty grandiose idea that is not going to happen. So I'd like to see up front, as soon as possible, their willingness to work within what the master plan is and some initial commission direction on some different ideas and kind of figure out what that is early on. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And staff has discussed that. That needs to be one of the first items out of the gate. Can they work within this 10.8 acres? Is it going to fit within what our community wants? Because otherwise we're just wasting our time and theirs.
And city involvement from here on out, where's the city's voice in this?
Tara Sundin, I believe, will be involved, if not her, someone else capable from the city. The mayor will be kept informed. Probably every other week or so, I meet with the mayor. We'll increase that frequently when things get more serious and as there's a need, but the city will be well informed and involved.
Okay. And is there a way, maybe not right this minute, but soon, it was brought up at least by Mr. Carlberg earlier about a joint venture, which is in essence a partnership, which I think will probably be structured similar to the agreement with Western Crossing. That'd be my guess. Versus an absolute sale where the developer takes ownership. Can you address that right now, or is it?
It might be premature, but I will say this, that, there's advantages and disadvantages to each. In an outright sale, we pretty much lose all control over that site. In a joint venture, we still will have a voice in the joint venture. But an outright sale brings us a lot of cash, whereas a joint venture would bring us maybe the same amount of cash over a longer period of time. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each. We'll have to explore that and see what the best scenario is. I'm not aware that there's an offer to buy it outright on the table, but if they came forward with that, I would certainly make you aware of that.
Have we heard of anybody at all in the last 8 years that was willing to buy?
Not at a price you've been willing to sell.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one question. We call this a master developer, and the public will think that's for the entire area. The master developer on the agreement we come up with, as I understand, will be just the 10.8 acres to begin with.
That's
Can you
correct.
elaborate on that, make sure that's part
Yeah,
of the record?
that's absolutely correct. Really, the port and the city are the master developers for the whole site. I mean, we're the ones that put together the zoning changes for the entire site. We're the ones that will control what goes on to that, in the Log Pond area, the shipping terminal being more industrial, et cetera. So this is basically, we're looking for a developer for 10.8 acres, and maybe it was a mistake to call it a master developer. We probably should have said developer for 10.8 acres.
Thank you.
Can I address we had a draft recently of the ENA, and there's one thing I don't believe we've talked about is I'm dropping this on you, so I don't know if you have a copy. You do. Number 13.
I just have the action.
That's okay. It's the meeting. I don't know if you guys all have a copy of that. So I want to read that because I think it's very important that the folks that are here, and hopefully there'll be some streaming of this later. I'm going to read just the last sentence so that folks understand exactly where we are in this process, even though I think you've already stated it. But this is a document that will be signed with Harcourt. It's the final sentence of the first, or the paragraph under number 13. This agreement does not obligate the port or Harcourt to accept the terms and conditions of the master development agreement or to otherwise sell, purchase, or develop the site, which I'm reading as meaning 120 days, what was 90, 120 days from now, the commission can look at the agreement that Harcourt was willing to sign and say, no. And there's, nobody pays anything and everybody walks away.
Absolutely. The only thing we want is, excuse me, is the staff time.
Okay. Right. So this, like Dan said, I want to make sure everybody's clear for the record that this is not an agreement to actually build anything yet, just to see if we're going to work with these guys and if they want to go with us.
Correct.
Right.
I'm disappointed, Mike, that you didn't read something about a whereas.
There's no where. Are there any whereas? Oh, there's now the whereas.
Lots of whereas.
I did take a bunch of other notes. Item number 12, and then I think that's the extent of my comments on this so far. This one is an interesting sentence. Nothing herein obligates the port to undertake modifications. This is changes to the master plan, or seek the consent of the city of Bellingham to such modifications. What is that? What does that mean?
Repeat that, I'm sorry.
So the line is, potential changes to master plan documents. Nothing herein shall obligate the port to undertake such modifications or seek the consent of the city of Bellingham to such modifications.
We didn't want Harcourt to come to us and say, your agreement says you have to go to the city and try and get the master plan changed. So basically that says, Harcourt, you can't force us to go to the city and ask for zoning changes. We may decide that's what we want to do, but they can't force us into that position.
I think that, Mr. McAuley, I think that is pretty much Harcourt will not directly communicate with these entities without the permission of the port. basically, isn't it?
Well, the way I'm reading it is that it even says here, Harcourt can suggest modifications, minor modifications, which you also spoke to in the presentation. But the next line, the way I read it says, we can make those modifications, we being the Board of Bellingham, can make those modifications without asking the City of Bellingham. I must be reading that incorrectly.
No, because we can't make those modifications without asking the city.
Okay.
I think what it says.
Oh, I read,
is-
okay, so
yeah.
now it makes, okay, what you just said,
Force us to
it doesn't force us to do that. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, all right. Because the way I was reading it was, we're under no obligation to ask.
Yeah.
If we want to, we can just change.
Mayor Kelly would disagree with that.
I'm sure a lot of people would. That's the extent of my comments on this. Anything further, Mr. Roth?
I have no other comments.
Mr. Dorgan?
I'm done.
All right, well, in that case, let's take a vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And no opposed, so to the left, and we're looking forward to this process. And the citizens are looking forward to this process, so thank you.
I'll see you in 120 days.
Okay, and we're going to address our second item of the executive, which was the original first item. Okay.
A motion to authorize the executive director to execute mutual partial release and settlement agreements with the following: David L. Peterson and Susan G. Peterson and their insurance carrier, Safeco Insurance Company. Roger G. Smith and Carol J. Smith and their insurance carrier, Safeco Insurance Company. Alan S. Truman and his insurance carrier, State Farm Fire and Casualty Company. Michael F. Roberts and Barbara H. Roberts. And William Dodge and William Edward Dodge in his capacity as personal representative of Mary Teen Dodge. And David D. Cahalan and Mary F. Burke.
Do you want to do the second motion as well? It's got a two-part motion.
And a motion to authorize the executive director to pay the outstanding fee to the National Pollution Fund resulting from the Coast Guard response to the March 30th, 2012, 12th Marina Boathouse Fire.
Thank you, Commissioners. As the Commission recalls, as everyone recalls, March 30th, 2012, Boathouse G East caught on fire. 11 boats sank. 2 people were killed. The boathouse sank as well. The port responded to that and raised the vessels, raised the structure that was the boathouse under the supervision of the police department, the fire department, and the U.S. Coast Guard. To date, the port has a claim of around $1,824,000. That's been paid by the port's liability insurance, casualty insurance carrier, some by its liability carrier. These include response costs that come in and do all that work to raise those vessels, damage to the port's property, some lost revenue from slip rental, and the Coast Guard response costs. Late last year, we engaged in a 2-day mediation. As the Commission knows, there's 4 lawsuits that have been consolidated in federal district court in Seattle and under admiralty jurisdiction, because these are boats. We engaged in a 4-day mediation involving just the property loss aspects of this claim. As the port's aware, the estates of Mr. Alonji and the estate of Mr. Taylor have also made a claim in the admiralty court and in state court for those deaths. So, as a result of that, we have the first 6 of these settlements to come before the port. What happens here, Commissioners, is some of the boat owners, although not necessarily required by the port rules and regulations, name the port as an additional insured under their policies. We early on notified those carriers of their obligations to the port. Most of those carriers did not respond to those notifications. So the result of that is each of the boat owners and their boat, because it's admiralty, so the boat actually pays, is going to reimburse the port $75,000 for their costs. And if there's an insurance company involved that was an additional insured that didn't respond, that's an additional $75,000. So I come before you today with 6 of the 11, totaling $675,000. What's going to happen to that money? The port has a deductible of $125,000, which will come back to the port. so the port will be made whole. And the balance of that money is allocated between our two insurance carriers, Star Alliance and Lexington. And then we anticipate at the next meeting, hopefully, bringing before you the last four of the last 5 settlements. One settlement is tied up in a probate, so that's going to take a little bit of time. But generally along the same settlement guidelines that I just mentioned to you here today. So mostly we're with the insurance company money, but the port will be made whole and get its $125,000 of deductible back. So with that, that's the nature. Oh, I should tell you, the Coast Guard charges you under the National Pollution Fund for responding to any emergency where there's a fire on water. And their bill is around $14,000 for their response. And so we also have to, that'll come out of the insurance company's share of that money. They have to pay that as well.
A few things that are important to note here. This is just for the environmental cleanup.
It's just for the, no, it is for the property damage claims, both ways. So this is a mutual release. So we are saying to the boat owners, give us $75,000 or $150,000 if you're got an insurance company that need to respond to our letters. And we will release you from any claims for property damage, which includes raising the vessels, damage to our dock, anything related to lost profits, property damage. And they are then also releasing the port from any claim related to the damage to their boat, the property in their boat, anything else. We are also releasing them from any claim related to any other potential claims out there, except for, and it's important to note, except for the 2 wrongful death claims. That's been reserved by everybody, because that's a kind of an ongoing matter.
And that's understandable, but this isn't, there's no way we're paying for anyone's loss of a boat here.
They are paying us, and they are releasing us from any claim for their boat. Because their insurance, I should say, their insurance companies pay for their boats.
Right.
And we said, okay, you owe us for all these claims that we have, and we've settled on the basis of saying pay us and release us from any claims related to your boats.
So up to this point on this release, it costs the taxpayer of Whatcom County nothing.
Staff time. Staff, of course, did an excellent job of responding. All the attorney's fees are paid by the insurance companies. All of the response costs are paid by the insurance companies. All of the lost profits so far to date have been paid by the insurance companies, and all we have really remaining is our deductible, but we get that back with this action. So we spend 0.
Thank you.
Anything, Jim?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. You know, I've been there 4 years. I don't know how long you've been here, Jim. How many times have you seen Frank there? I think that's the person I've seen you there.
When money's in trouble.
I guess we're happy when you're not sending it.
I bring the money, these guys spend it.
All right, Nancy.
Authorize an increase to the total authorized contract amount with Air Transport IT Services Incorporated, Air IT of Orlando, Florida, for the Airport Commercial Terminal Expansion Phase 2 project. Passenger processing system in the amount of amendment number 2, which is valued at $53,449 for a new total authorized contract amount of $790,168.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Air IT is the provider of our passenger processing system, which is under design and is going to be implemented March 28th through April 16th, kind of a 3-week window that we have. When this passenger processing system is combined with our media distribution system throughout the terminal, these actually form a revenue creating vehicle, both direct and indirect revenues. Directly, we're able to sell advertising over this vehicle, and it's difficult to say how much that can be. Airports our size are maybe a couple $100,000 annually of advertising revenue. So this is a revenue producer. Indirectly, it brings money in that it lowers our cost per in-plane passenger and makes our airport more attractive for airlines, that sort of thing. You'll notice this is an amendment, not a change order, and that's because we used for this selection a slightly different RCW that we've never used before. It is subtitled Electronic Data Processing and Telecommunications Systems. And what we end up with, our contracting vehicle at the end of the day with this Air IT is a personal services agreement, even though they're supplying us hardware and installing it on site. The difference for us there is then the selection is not simply a hard bid, but there's actually a value that we assigned during the specifications and then could select the vendor via that value. So again, that's why we're having an amendment today and not a change order. This amendment essentially fills an underlap. The system between the media distribution system and the passenger processing system, one is basically all the monitors and the other is basically the software. And you can imagine the marriage between these two entities is complicated and highly technical. And what we discover is that when we put out our specifications and then they respond with a proposal that's supported by a bill of materials, we can see exactly if our communications aligned. And in this case, we've discovered some overlaps, in which case we're getting money back, but in this case we found a pretty good underlap. And that is that we basically were missing three key pieces of hardware. The most cheap of those is the barcode readers. Barcode readers are used at ticket gates. If a passenger produces a boarding ticket, and then they come up there to the boarding gate or the ticket lobby, the agent can scan it and immediately have all the information on cue. So it's a speedier passenger processing is what it is. The other two pieces of equipment we discovered in this underlap are what are called display device controllers, and that is where the software actually ultimately talks to the monitor. There's a little computer that lives right in between those two things, and that's what a DDC is. And then the third is the creation of a separate network for this passenger processing system to live in. The port has about 6 separate networks that we run here, and our basic MO there is wherever we have contact with the outside external parties, they are not into our central network, but we create a network that they can interface with that's distinct and separate from our own. So this is one of those 6. The project is well within budget. This comes out of the airport commercial terminal expansion budget that is paid for by passenger facility charges, not by tax dollars. The project at this point appears to be between 5 and 8% under budget, and the addition of this equipment actually gets this PSA to where our engineer's estimate was for the service. So it's just simply a missing piece of equipment that we have not purchased and need to. Any questions?
Makes it easier and doesn't cost anything.
Kind of. It'll pay for itself.
$30,000 doesn't cost anything? Do you anticipate any other expenses that bringing all this online?
There are a couple other expenses that I'm happy to tell you about. They are within the contract contingency that the commission awarded. They are such things as paper stock for the ticketing. What happens is every airport gets custom paper stock made, that has its Bellingham Airport sort of thing, and then it prints out a ticket on that. I don't know how to explain it very well. Anyways, the idea is you have to make custom stock for your airport. As staff, since we are lean and mean and they have resources and have done this several times, we have employed them to develop the stock, get us the first quarter's worth, and then we can take over the vendorship and get our own paper at that point.
So there's still some blanks being filled in. That's all this is.
I'm sorry, Mr.
That's okay. I have a question for Mr. Zane. So I got a text about baby changing stations in the restrooms. So that's one of those things we're still filling in the blanks.
Yeah, Adam will probably address that better than I can.
Okay,
sure. So In our new construction, we have family changing rooms, or family restrooms, in addition to men's and women's rooms, and in each of those is a baby changing station. We are doing a project later this year that is mostly centered around the Customs Edition, or the FIS, Federal Inspection Services. And at that point, if it was desired, we thought we could pick up a few of those little nuances to the building that are minor costs but major convenience to the traveling public.
Makes me look amazing. Actually, you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
So those changing facilities are only in the family restrooms, not that?
I know they are there, and I've not ventured into the women's room to see if they're there.
But are they in the men's too?
They are not in the men's room.
Okay, so it's probably in the men's. And how many can that occupy? I mean, how many of those are there?
There are 3, and they are single family occupancy.
There's 3. Thank you.
Does that mean they're just, is this even, this is on?
Is this
on?
Yeah,
Now it's
there you
on. I couldn't hear it. It's not very sensitive. It's not. It's being on top of it. Can you hear me? Say, so they're not going to go in every restroom? Is that?
They're not in every restroom currently, but the idea is that we could add them rather inexpensively in the future, and potentially could do that even this year.
Okay, yeah, because one of the concerns I had was for the men, because I don't have a baby, I'm not going to ever have a baby, but, I'm probably going to be uncomfortable walking into a women's restroom.
Yeah.
But there's a family option.
Yeah, there's a family option, so we're covered, but just perhaps not as broadly as you could be.
So you're just going to see if the 3 are ever all being used at once, and you'll add them to the other restrooms?
That's a fair idea, is to just sort of monitor and keep, as much as we can, keep track how well they're used, and then decide appropriately.
You think 3 would be enough until a plane is an hour overdue and it lands and everyone's heading for those 3 restrooms?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner, I don't have a good sense how many of those are actually needed in a facility that size, but I know they're not very expensive to add, and so.
Thank you.
Any more, Jim? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Commissioner.
Seems like it's either too much or nothing.
You'd be happy to know we have money in the budget for commission chamber electronic work. That includes microphones and Wi-Fi and internet access and all that good stuff.
Either that or I'm bringing my karaoke machine next time. First, Diane.
Authorize the executive director to execute a change order, excuse me, with Strider Construction Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $40,000 for disposal of contaminated soils for the Westman Marine Site Cleanup Project, and to provide this amount of increase to the caustic plume cell building demolition project contract for a total authorized contract amount of $4,823,745.58.
And first, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a request before you today to add a change order to an existing contract that we have with Strider Construction, who is constructing the cleanup at the Mercury Cell Building. The work is intended for the excavation, removal of excavation spoils that was created when Boundary Fish expanded their facility in Blaine, and that then generated approximately 400 tons of material that is contaminated with shipyard type contamination. And this, again, this is a site that's a combined site, the Blaine industrial area contamination site, which includes, among others, the Westman shipyard area. And so the soils were tested after excavation and were shown to be contaminated to a certain level. The level of contamination is not a low level of contamination, but not low enough to be considered generally disposed of at a normal landfill operation. So it has to be transported to one of the 2 contaminated landfill sites, one in Washington and one in Oregon. So either one of those 2. And so because it's a small quantity and it's a relatively short time frame for needing to get rid of the material, instead of having it set on the site, although it's undercover, it really needs to be disposed of in a timely manner. So this change order method is deemed as the most timely manner to be able to get rid of that material. The nice thing about this is we do have a contractor on the site that has WAPR trained personnel, and they know the procedures for handling this type of waste. And we received a proposal from them that was negotiated and looks to be a reasonable way to, cost-wise and timeliness-wise, to remove the material from the site. So we're asking the commission then to approve this change order, which also then adds contingency to the existing contract with Strider for the cell building cleanup. So that contract is made whole.
Is that?
Yes, sir. No,
Does that mean removing the rails and all of in the holding yard, or what's the deal there?
no, what's happened, Commissioner, is when the foundation was excavated for the boundary fish expansion, it generated about 250 yards of material coming out of that hole so they could build the foundation. Because it's contaminated, that material cannot go back in to the hole. Once it's excavated, it becomes generated material, and so then it has to be disposed of. So in the meantime, it was put on a plastic liner with a plastic cover over it and sandbagged down, so it's isolated, but it now has to be removed from the site. It's currently sitting on the site of the old Blaine Protein warehouse site on the east side of the Marine Industrial Park.
That didn't include anything from Westman, or was it basically on Boundaries property?
It's on Boundaries property, but it's part of the general contamination on the soils of the site.
Part of the reason you must be doing this with the local folks that are down at GP doing the cleanup is, $40,000 is something sometime you'd go out for bid on, but these guys are qualified, they're there, they can do it right away. Is that the reason there's not a bid?
Yes, sir, that's part of the reason. The other reason is it really, in order to go out to bid, we'd have to pay for generation of plans, specs, and documents and bid that project. That usually takes about 60 days to do that work, and then we have to pay for that cost. This way, we basically give them the specs, and on those specs, then they come up with a price, and we check those prices, and we're able to actually get it done more efficiently in this case, because it is a relatively small.
And the biggest expense is putting it in the landfill rather than bagging it up and loading it out.
That's correct. That's more than 50% of the cost is just having it go to the site.
And if we approve this, how soon will they remove it?
We'll get a schedule from them, but it'll be very timely.
Within 2 weeks? Or?
No, probably. It will depend on receiving the containers, because this is normally loaded in receiving containers, and that's delivered to the Ferndale facility, loaded on rail cars, and hauled to the site. So it really is dependent upon the speed that we get the containers in this part of the state.
Thank you.
So it would be, I would assume it's going to be done over 60 days or shorter, but I can't guarantee that until we get the firm contract from the contractor, and then they get that contract from the receiving landfill.
So the containers come in on a train, do they go back on the train as well?
The containers go back on the train.
Wonderful.
Right. And then they're delivered by the landfill company. They actually are taken off and then delivered to the site, and then picked up at the site and delivered to the train, loaded on the train, and hauled to either the Oregon or the Washington site.
Cool.
John, it doesn't refer to Westman, but do you know the status of the pier project going on at Blaine? The repair of that?
No, that's not my project. I defer that to Fred Seeger.
Commissioner, I can answer that one. The total piece of work out there at the Blaine Pier is about 6 weeks. So we've been on for about 2 weeks, and the pile work is all done. That's the initial part of it. That's going to wrap up here very shortly. Then the rest of it is the decking and a little bit of substructure work. So
how many weeks have we?
So I think we're about 3 or 4 weeks out, and if the weather holds good. But it's all been advertised. The general public knows that it's a 6-week job. It's been in the local paper. So it's progressing on schedule. We should have it wrapped up in 3 or 4 weeks.
We have a birding festival on the 15th of March, and it's growing rapidly. It's our 12th year, and that's such a great place to go view birds.
Yeah.
But probably not.
Well, the access way, I don't know the answer to that one. It might encroach on that time, but at least that access way, the causeway, so to speak, would be open. You could open that up. Right now that's closed, so we don't get cars to get down there, and then they can't turn around and come back, but we could open that way to walkers, though.
Yeah, true. Thank you.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Herschel. And our next item is a real estate item.
Excuse me, I'm sorry for my voice. A motion by the Commission approving a modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Halibut Henry's LLC, Bellingham International Airport.
Thank you, Diane. Commissioners, Vicki Rogers, Halibut Henry's, has been a long-term tenant at the airport, 15 or more years. Her lease has been modified several times. Today we are here to address the impact of the airport terminal construction project on this tenant, which was much greater than initially anticipated, more so than temporary displacement of her landside portion of business. The tenant literally has been in the path of progress of the terminal expansion, including a 5-year lease that was in place for premises on the 2nd floor of the terminal building, in which our tenant was willing to relocate to make way for the terminal expansion. The modification of lease before you today recognizes a 4-month no-rent period beginning November 1, 2013, ending February 28, 2014, and represents a settlement between the parties relative to the construction impacts. Further, this modification provides for termination of the rental portion of the upstairs premises and incorporates an additional 60 square feet to the airside premises. The fiscal impact of the no rent period is about $20,000. Staff recommends approval of this transaction and would like to take or address any questions or comments. Concludes my presentation. Thank you.
She hasn't paid her rent for the last 4 months, anticipating that we would do this, or?
That is not correct, Commissioner. Very good question. She is current in her rents and has been paying on a regular basis.
So will the next 4 months be the reduction, or?
The no rent period will be beginning November 1, ending February 2014. Any rents that she has already paid will be applied as a non-cash credit to her account.
Okay.
But she is current and pays very timely.
And obviously, we're having a celebration of the airport here this week. Is it now complete? Is she happy?
She is very happy. I've talked to her and her staff. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. And looks like Rob's got some.
I don't, but Elizabeth Monahan does. So one more item for your approval that just came in.
Joey, go ahead. Would you, need a motion, please? A motion to the Commission to make an exception to Port Resolution Number 638, establishing basic rules and regulations governing the hiring of relatives, adopted by the Commission on February 8, 1977, and authorize the Executive Director to extend an offer of employment to Christopher Snyder, relative of Tracy Patterson.
Thank you, Diane. This is a very unique request that I have in front of you, and it refers back to a resolution that the Port Commission passed in 1977. And that resolution, number 638, defines relatives as father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, nephew, niece, in-law, and first cousin, and prohibits the employment of relatives within the same district, department, or operation as as the employee to which they are related. And the request that we have in front of you right now is to provide a one-time exception to this resolution, because we've got a position in our maintenance department where we're replacing a very long-term employee, Don Snyder, who retired. He was a maintenance mechanic and a foreman, and we went out and did an extensive recruitment, did not get very many qualified applications, extended the recruitment 2 times, hoping that we could find some more people. Christopher Snyder was one of the qualified candidates. We had another qualified candidate who at the last minute backed out, took another job someplace else. So we interviewed Christopher Snyder and determined that he was our most qualified candidate. He's got very excellent skills and a lot of background that we desperately need for this position. And he did disclose to us that he is related to Ms. Tracy Patterson, who is our grounds foreman in the maintenance department. So this resolution will tell us that we can't employ them because they're in the same department or division. But they would not have any reporting relationships to each other when they're in the grounds department. They would actually report to different supervisors in the maintenance department. Or Ms. Patterson reports to Carol Williams, and if this is approved, Chris Snyder would report to Mike Bozzo.
Would this, in the future, would this bring the same resolution to a head? You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure I said it right, but...
If we have similar situations?
Right.
Well, one thing that I'm working on, because I'm finding some of these old resolutions, that if you notice, doesn't even really keep up to current date, because one relative that wasn't mentioned is spouse or domestic partner.
Or grandkids, I've got 8 of those. They're all gonna be partners, right?
Right, and generally, nowadays, we don't really look at first cousins as one of those direct relatives, and when you're in a community our size, you could be excluding a lot of very good candidates. So something that I'm working with Mr. Fix on, and through Frank's office, is to identify some of these very old resolutions that deal with employment practices that most likely need to be tweaked or updated, and somehow do a revision of those or work those into the delegation of authority that you provide with.
So the action you take today, that's...
It's just a one-time thing.
One-time, yeah.
Elizabeth, what's the relationship again? between
So,
Snyder and Ms. Snyder?
Don Snyder, who's retired, this is his son, but his son is this brother-in-law of Tracy Patterson. So he's married to Tracy's sister.
Well, it doesn't say anything about brother-in-law.
It says in-laws.
Oh, in-laws.
It says in-laws.
Does that count? Oh, okay.
And it doesn't define mother-in-law, father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law.
But the main reason you're making the exception is because you advertised it and didn't get qualified people, except for this one is really qualified.
And he, being in those interviews, and the foreman, the maintenance foreman was in those as well with Carol and Mike, he most probably would have come out tops even if we had a whole slew of candidates. He's very well qualified.
It's an outdated resolution, that's all.
It's an outdated resolution. We've got a top-notch candidate. We could really use his skills. He would be a very good addition.
This, Commissioners, this is a way to move expeditiously on this hire while the HR department takes a more broad look at the older resolutions.
So let me ask you this, Elizabeth. Would you be recommending in a new resolution that updates this policy that's more reflective of today's sort of standard, I suppose? I can think of a lot of other things should be updated like this. Not here, by the way.
There's here too.
Well, there's here too, but so would in your recommendations in a future resolution, would this be allowed?
We can look at kind of an update 2 different ways. We could actually go through a process and have you rescind this, or how do we do that, Frank? Modify this resolution with a new resolution?
Supersede it.
Supersede it. Or we could supersede these resolutions and I could list them all out, and you could then defer that to the delegation of authority, which you already tell the executive director that they establish all the rules and policies for operating.
So I don't think I asked my question well. would you be recommending a situation like this be included in a resolution in the future or excluded? So this hire could not happen in the future if we had a new resolution?
I think that I would probably want something like that to happen in the future, to not be excluded.
To allow it.
To allow it.
What's allowed, Frank?
There is no, well, there's a law that applies to you and the directors that precludes you from being beneficially interested in the contract made under your supervision. That's been interpreted to include if you hire someone who is dependent on you for support. So if you hire a child that lives at your house, you hire your spouse, that kind of thing is against the rules. But once you get away from municipal officers, which is arguably the next level of port staff people, there is no rule.
I'm glad you're looking at revising
Yeah, this one seems like a pretty straightforward and simple thing to do, but I think it's not, actually, because it's really a perception issue. So we're looking at hiring the son of a retiree, is that correct? Who's also related through marriage to another employee. I mean, the whole point of these resolutions in the first place is to get away from this image or actual impropriety of hiring people based on their relationship status to an existing employee, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think this candidate, the skills and experience that he possesses puts him so far above any of the other candidates that we saw.
Well, that could be in every case, though. I mean, you could argue that on each issue. I'm more concerned, first of all, that if Don's retired, you're not hiring a relative of Don who's an employee here.
It's Tracy Patterson's.
It's Tracy, so it doesn't matter about the guy retired, the father. So it's just the brother-in-law in this particular case, and sister-in-law.
Well, that person would be the only employed relative. But again, still, the new hire would be the son of a person who is retired. Right?
Right.
Well, I thought he was already retired.
But he stopped working
He's not
December
working right
31st,
now.
and
He's burning through vacation.
he's burning vacation hours right now, and he will be completely gone March 31. But he's not in the facility at all,
And this hire would be before March 31.
preferably.
Yes.
It's kind of a weird spot. Because I'm inclined to say no on this one because we don't quite have a new resolution in front of us, but we have a person who's ultimately capable and qualified to do the job.
That's why we made it a one-time occurrence for this one. When we get it right on the permanent resolution, we're just asking for an exception for this one individual.
You read the resolution, too.
Correct. And we'll go fix the resolution and come back to you with a more permanent solution.
Let's try to figure out how to write that then so that this one exception isn't something we can just easily do whenever we feel like it on a whim. So it's a little more, it's not flexible. I don't think it should be flexible to the point where we can just decide to change the rules. We're not the, house of...
Well, you can do that on pretty much anything.
Yeah, Commissioners, the resolutions bind the staff, but you can always make an exception to a purchasing resolution or as long as it doesn't violate state law.
Yeah.
So that's why this comes before you, because it has to be an exception. It cannot be done by staff.
Well, I'm inclined to follow suit with the suggestion, but I think there's a lot more conversation about this that has to get figured out.
Agreed.
Okay. Anything else? Yes. Dan?
I'll be voting in favor of it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else? Anything new from anybody at all? Members of the public? Thank you for coming, all those who did.
Just take it to the county council.
The county council. And for anybody who wants to come to the airport expansion celebration, it's Thursday morning at 10 a.m. apparently at the airport.
No, it's not open to the public.
Sure it is. I just invited the public. It's not open to the public?
No, we're doing one for the public this summer. We haven't worked out logistics for security for the public yet.
Public should have dancing and candy.
Well, apparently 2 or more commissioners will be there. I'm
I'm invited. Can I bring my wife?
Oh, I